The National Desk, America's News Now. Right now, retaliation allegations. Self-described FBI whistleblowers in a House hearing say they lost their clearance for exposing alleged abuses of power.
If you're one of these folks willing to come forward and talk about what's going on out there, you get attacked. They will try to crush you.
Developing today, the country's debt default deadline inching closer each and every second. How congressional salaries could be impacted without a timely agreement.
The House has passed the bill. The Senate has no bill. The Senate needs to pass the House's bill. The House is doing what the people want.
Hazy shade of spring. Millions at risk as smoke from Canadian wildfires impact the entire Northwest. More on that in a moment. You're watching the National Desk America. Capitol Hill this morning as a Republican-led select subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government held its fourth hearing on alleged abuses of power at the FBI and claims of related retaliation. Suspended FBI agents Garrett O'Boyle, Steve Friend, and Marcus Allen and Empower Oversight President Tristan Levity testified just hours ago. The four repeatedly making claims that agents must not question the narrative set forth by the FBI or it could lead to severe consequences.
Recently, my counsel filed a whistleblower complaint with the Justice Department's Office of Inspector General. The complaint set forth retaliation through misuse of the security clearance process, as well as reprisal against me for making a protected disclosure.
Now, the hearing was held up by multiple questions from Democrats questioning whether or not the witnesses, in fact, held whistleblower protection. Chairman Jordan making the case today that these individuals were far from unique and that he has heard from more than a dozen whistleblowers speaking out against the FBI. Now, interestingly, the hearing took a recess to vote on a resolution to support local and state law officers. DOJ and FBI officers were not included in the language there. It passed 301 to 119. There's a renewed and controversial effort in Washington right now to provide reparations for black Americans. The authors of a new bill say that at least $14 trillion should be given to the descendants of slaves. Can the country afford it, though? The National Desk's chief political correspondent Scott Thuman reports.
Talked about for decades, but now getting new life. A bill to give federal reparations for black Americans to help compensate for an oppressive past with a more liberating tomorrow.
We're not here to request that future. We're here to demand it.
Yeah. That's right.
We need that future now. Reparations now.
Reparations now.
Congresswoman Cori Bush introducing a bill calling for $14 trillion for black Americans to help close the racial wealth gap with white citizens and make transformative changes in housing, healthcare, and education. How to pay for it all, unclear. But they suggested America already pays for, quote, forever wars, sending huge sums overseas. That proposed $14 trillion, though, almost half of America's entire national debt. And speaking of,
if Washington wants to spend more, it will have to come together, find savings elsewhere, just like every single household in America.
The most heated debate in Washington now is over how not to default as the country struggles to pay its bills.
We're going to come together because there's no alternative to do the right thing for the country.
Meanwhile, a reparations task force in California is recommending possibly billions of dollars in payments there for a state already facing an almost $32 billion budget shortfall. More states considering similar paths, though some black scholars suggest expanded welfare benefits, educational scholarships, and other programs have already made a difference.
All of that was reparations for what had happened before. Some of those things worked, like affirmative action. Some of them didn't, like the Community Reinvestment Act. But that was reparations.
It's not the first time this issue has been debated here on the Hill, according to the Washington Post. Each session since 1989 has had some sort of debate.
And they keep trying and trying, Scott. The others have failed. Does this one actually stand a chance?
Well, it's unclear how much support it could really get. A lot of Republicans already, as you might predict, lining up against it. We don't know what the White House stance on it would be. But when you look at a place like California, Even Governor Gavin Newsom there has not yet publicly shown support for spending that kind of money.
Scott Thuman reporting from the Capitol. Thank you. In the border crisis, an 8-year-old girl has died in Border Patrol custody. Authorities saying that child and her family were being held at a station in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, an area seeing many migrant encounters. That girl had a medical emergency, they say, and was taken to a nearby hospital where she passed. Border agents didn't disclose her nationality or provide any additional details. They say a death in custody is a rare occurrence, even as agents deal with overcrowding after a brief surge of migrants last week. Customs and Border Protection will investigate. A Texas man has pleaded guilty to purchasing a gun for a Mexican drug cartel linked to the deadly kidnapping of 4 Americans earlier this year. 42-year-old Roberto Lugardo Moreno Jr. of Harlingen, Texas, appeared before a federal judge in Brownsville and pleaded guilty to charges of straw purchasing and smuggling a firearm. U.S. Attorney Alamdar Hamdani said all too often firearms are trafficked into Mexico, where they end up in the hands of criminals who use them to murder. A public defender for Lugardo did not respond to requests for comment. Sentencing was scheduled for August. Texas Governor Greg Abbott is expected to sign a bill banning gender-affirming care for minors. Abbott previously ordered child welfare officials to investigate such treatment as abuse, arguing that potentially life-altering and irreversible health care actions shouldn't be offered to minors. At least 17 other states have enacted similar bans as conservative lawmakers push for legislation specifically impacting LGBTQ Americans. Critics, including respected medical organizations, oppose the trans health care bans, the American Medical Association calling it a, quote, dangerous intrusion of government into the practice of medicine. Developing now, first responders in North Carolina say at least 15 people have been rescued from a 4-alarm fire that broke out at a construction site near downtown Charlotte. You see it here. The Charlotte Fire Department responding to this fire at an apartment building this morning in the city's South Park neighborhood. A crane operator is being treated for non-life-threatening injuries, and 2 people right now are missing. It's unclear, though, if anyone else was hurt or what exactly caused this fire. The parent company of Walgreens has reached a $230 million settlement with the city of San Francisco. Officials there brought a lawsuit against the company, accusing the pharmacy chain of being liable in San Francisco's opioid epidemic. A judge accused the company of a 15-year failure to flag possible misuse of highly addictive drugs. Walgreens did not admit fault in the statement. The settlement avoids a trial to determine damages. Some major retailers like Home Depot and Walmart are out with quarterly earnings this week, reporting some mixed outlooks as consumers slow down spending on goods and look for deals to offset the cost of inflation. As national correspondent Atra Elnashan reports, profit margins are also getting hit now with the rise of organized retail crime.
It's a tough time to be a brick-and-mortar retailer. Competing with online shopping, less foot traffic since the pandemic, a labor shortage, all headwinds for running a profitable business.
See you again soon.
An uphill battle made worse by bad actors. This week, Target reporting sales were flat in the first quarter. CEO Brian Cornell telling shareholders they predict shrink, which is lost, stolen, or damaged product, will cost them an additional $500 million this year. He says organized retail crime is a major driver.
Unfortunately, it was very consistent with what we've been hearing from a pretty large number of our members.
The National Retail Federation's Chief Administrative Officer and General Counsel, Stephanie Martz, says national chains tend to be targeted more than small businesses. Police in Montgomery County, Maryland this week releasing this surveillance video of suspects leaving a CVS with bags full of skincare products.
Because they tend to be laid out similarly. And so, if you run a theft at one store, you can replicate that at other stores.
Smash and grab incidents often make the rounds on social media and the news, but Martz says violent episodes are just a small percentage of organized retail crimes.
There are a lot of very sophisticated efforts to steal very large amounts of product that don't involve human contact at all.
There have been some high-profile store closures in the past month, and some, like 2 Nordstrom locations in San Francisco, are tied to crime in the area, accelerating a wave of closures also fueled by shrinking demand for in-person shopping. Retailers notched a win in their fight against organized retail crime last year with the passage of the Informed Consumers Act. It's meant to increase transparency for third-party, high-volume sellers. The National Retail Federation tells me they're looking forward to seeing how effective it is in preventing thieves from selling their stolen goods online. In Washington, I'm Atrell Nishar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis jumping into the 2024 presidential race next week. He's planning to file paperwork with the Federal Election Commission declaring his candidacy. He's, however, expected to make the formal announcement the following week in his hometown of Dunedin, Florida. The paperwork filing coincides with a gathering of top fundraisers in South Florida next week. Sources caution that plans could change. We'll keep an eye on it. The feud, though, heating up now between Disney and DeSantis. Disney just canceling some plans to build a $1 billion office complex in the state due to changing business conditions, they say. That's according to a CNN report. The offices would have been located near Lake Nona in the Central Florida area and would have brought in about 2,000 jobs. No more. A DeSantis spokesperson says the move was not surprising given the company's financial straits, falling market cap, and declining stock price, putting it back on them. Coming up right here on the National Desk, President Biden in Japan. We take a look at the beginning of his shortened trip overseas. And air quality right now diminishing as smoke from the west impacts the middle of the country. And with the deadline getting no deal on the debt ceiling. We're going to hear from lawmakers on what it could look like. President Biden says the U.S. and Japan are working well together, and he hopes the two countries can build deeper connections with tech partnerships.
Bottom line, Mr. Prime Minister, is that when our countries stand together, we stand stronger. And I believe the whole world is safer when we do.
The president met with the Prime Minister of Japan today on the eve of the G7 summit in Hiroshima. President Biden will attend the summit, but his trip to Japan is cut short. Originally an 8-day trip is now a 4-day trip. The president wanting to come back to the United States to finish negotiations on the debt ceiling. He says he'll see them through. Now, as debt talks continue, a new bill could add some personal motivation for members of Congress to get to an agreement fast. Bipartisan legislation named the No Pay for Congress During Default or Shutdown Act. Pretty clear there. It's as straightforward as it comes there. If the nation defaults or if the government shuts down, Congress simply won't get paid. While there's optimism that a deal will come, the deadline remains right now June 1st, according to the Treasury Secretary. Smoke from over 100 Canadian wildfires affecting air quality in the northern U.S. today. Look at all that fire. Now, some of the most impacted states are Washington, Minnesota, Montana, North and South Dakota, also Nebraska, Iowa, and Wyoming. Lots of people impacted by this. Air quality is particularly bad near the U.S.-Canada border from eastern Washington all the way to Minnesota. You can see a map right here behind me, and you see the purple, red, and orange areas, and yellow as well, indicating worsening air quality. Parts of Oregon, Ohio, Ohio, Illinois, and Idaho, possibly the Northeast, too, can see more smoke in the next few days. The National Weather Service is advising sensitive groups to limit their time outdoors. To your money now. Fewer Americans applied for jobless claims last week. According to the Labor Department, U.S. applications for unemployment claims fell by 22,000 to 242,000 from 264,000 the previous week. And that previous spike in claims led to some analysts believing that the frenzy of interest rate hikes were finally cooling the job market. Well, as it turns out, the spike was due to a spate of fraudulent applications in the state of Massachusetts. The Fed's hoping to achieve a soft economic landing with rate hikes in hopes of slowing high inflation, of course. A new study reveals concerning findings about older adults skipping or delaying medications for financial reasons. The report from JAMA Network Open finds about 1 in 5 adults 65 and older skipped or delayed their medication, took less than prescribed, or took someone else's medication because of the high costs. It's a big increase from 2016 when a medical care study found the number to be about 1 in 7. The lead author believes inflation and drug costs drove that increase. Just a few weeks ago, the United States Army decided to ground all pilots who are not currently involved in critical missions. Now, this comes after several recent helicopter crashes, you'll remember, that left more than a dozen service members dead. The latest incident only highlights a shockingly prevalent problem in this country, the number of those killed in military training accidents. Spotlight on America's Christine Frizzell gives us a closer look.
From the time he was in first grade, Connor McDowell knew he wanted to be a Marine, a decision ingrained in him as soon as he was 11.
I took 2 Lego towers, he was very into Legos at that point, and showed him what happened. He took it all in very quietly, and then he looked up at me and he said, "Mommy, when I grow up, I'm going to protect my country."
But Susan Flanagan and Michael McDowell say their son questioned that lifelong ambition during his military training when he told his father many of the vehicles were not well maintained.
They said, "We're cannibalizing spare parts for them." He predicted, in some senses, someone would be killed in a private diary he had, which we discovered after, and it was him. He was killed.
It happened when the light armored vehicle he was commanding rolled over after falling into a concealed ditch during a training exercise in May of 2019. One of 15 rollover deaths that year. An investigation found McDowell was not at fault. Since then, training accidents, which the military calls mishaps, have happened time and time again. Between 2006 and 2021, there were more than 6,000 mishaps, accounting for 32% of active duty military deaths. And while mishaps do include off-duty car and motorcycle accidents, the numbers were far higher than the number of suicides and of those killed in combat, despite the fact that the United States was engaged in 2 active wars.
A lot of family members seem surprised, though. This is a military that gets more funding than any other military in the world. It's supposed to be the best military in the world. Why is this happening at all?
Well, I mean, we do very dangerous things in the military. We shoot, 500 million rounds of ammunition every year. We do 180,000 parachute jumps every year. We fly 800,000 hours with our helicopters every year. And there's a lot of inherent risk in everything that we do.
It's a risk General Gene Meredith says the military has never taken more seriously. He heads the U.S. Army Combat Readiness Center at Fort Novosel, Alabama.
For example,
here, classroom learning is accompanied by hands-on training.
So we'll put you in the right seat.
Okay.
This is typically where a student pilot would sit.
Both in the air and on land at what's known as the crash lab.
If you notice in here as you're looking in there's a lot of debris, there's a lot of burning that you can see.
Part of the learning comes from the pure shock and awe
Of actually seeing the vehicle that was in the accident where, somebody was grievously wounded or killed, and putting them in that scenario so they know what it's going to be like when they're on the ground.
Fighting for more on-the-ground training for men and women in the military is the next mission for Connor McDowell's parents.
You think today in 2023, a lot of these service members don't know what to do?
Put a simulator at every base and put the kids into it, and they will be horrified when that simulator rolls and terrified, and they will say, "Wait a minute, this could happen to me, and when it does, I'll know what to do."
Until then, they fear scenes like this will continue to happen. More families asking why and how, hoping updates in training and equipment will reverse this terrible trend. For Spotlight on America, I'm Christine Frizzell.
Developing now, the Supreme Court says Google, Twitter, and Facebook are not liable for terrorist attacks. Families of the victims of the 2017 nightclub attack in Turkey and a 2015 terrorist attack in Paris argued the companies didn't do enough to prevent their platforms from being used by extremists to recruit and plan the attacks. Well, the justices found the claims fell short of the companies aiding and abetting the attacks. Justices were also asked to decide if Section 230, that's the law shielding tech companies from lawsuits or what users post, is too broad. The court sidestepping that issue, saying it's not tied to the terrorist attacks. Every administration since the Reagan era has mishandled classified documents. That's according to officials with the National Archives and Records Administration. They say it's not just presidents and vice presidents. One National Archive official tells NBC News that since the year 2010, they've seen Congress members doing the same with classified information. This after classified documents were found at the properties of former President Trump, Vice President Mike Pence, and President Biden. There's a push to reform how information is classified now. Well, prosecutors say the Air National Guardsman charged with leaking classified documents online got several warnings about mishandling classified information. They say Jack Teixeira was warned at least 2 times last fall not to take notes or ask specific questions on intel he was given. A third incident report says a superior saw him looking at intelligence not related to his primary duty, but he wasn't punished. A judge is set to decide soon if Teixeira will stay in jail while he waits for trial. Coming up, members of the House and Senate weighing in on the debt debate, as well as the need for immigration reform in the expiration. The U.S. Treasury Department says the country could default on its debts in about just 2 weeks without a deal to raise the borrowing limit. And Congress is still focused on how to shore up a broken immigration system. In both these instances, everyone agrees a deal must get done. But what does one of these deals look like? Here's a window into those discussions as the National Desk connects you to Congress.
If you think back to 2019, the federal government took in $4.4 trillion. In 2022, we had $4.4 trillion in revenues. In the past year and a half, because of the COVID pandemic and the continuation of the emergency powers, we've really blown up the federal discretionary budget. We just get back to 2019 or even 2022 spending levels. We have the country on a totally reasonable fiscal pathway. I don't think you need to cut Social Security or Medicare. In fact, I know you don't need to cut Social Security or Medicare to get us there. You just need to cut back on some of the discretionary spending.
I am confident that something will get done, but this gamesmanship that's been going on with the GOP is so unnecessary. And so, creating instability with our economy here at home, globally, and then also just, the possible threat of how it's going to affect people. It will affect the National Defense Authorization Act, which has now been put off. We were supposed to go into markup around Memorial Day, the week before Memorial Day. And then just the effect on senior citizens, on families, and just, a lot of people who depend on benefits, including veterans.
We've had several constituent complaints about groups of illegals congregating in towns in the district. The sheriffs are warning they're starting to see increased gang activity. We saw this cartel execution in Tulare, right next to my district, just a few weeks ago. These are simply the first warning signs of what's going to be happening across the entire country. The Border Patrol agents have warned me this is no longer a border issue. They don't stay at the border. They have moved into every district in the United States, and the impact on our schools, our hospitals, our social safety net, our public safety, and the labor rates for working Americans is going to be devastating. Already is becoming that.
What we're seeing is people coming into the country. There has definitely been a crackdown by this administration, making sure that anyone who enters illegally is punished for that. And so to me, this just indicates that Congress needs to do its work and finally get serious about passing comprehensive immigration reform.
Coming up here on the National Desk, the French Open might look a little different when it kicks off next week. What's stopping a star player from competing in 90 seconds? Tennis fans could miss a chance to see history next week. Tennis great Rafael Nadal has pulled himself from the 2023 French Open due to a hip injury. Nadal is tied with Novak Djokovic for the most male Grand Slam titles with 22 wins, but 14 of those came at the French Open. The 36-year-old is looking at retirement next year, saying it could take months for him to return, if he returns to the court at all. Thanks so much for joining us today. Coming up tonight on the National Desk at 10 p.m. Eastern, we're going to take a deeper look into the major delays in getting treatments for cancer and other life-threatening diseases, with drug shortages here in the U.S. hitting record levels. In the meantime, for more information on all of these stories and much more, please visit us online at thenationaldesk.com. Have a great day, everybody.